One of the most regular cargoes that were carried from Newquay Harbour was iron ore. Now this was taken up to the smelting works up in Wales, up in Cardiff and Swansea, and then on the return trip they would bring back coal, which was, some was actually taken into Porth for the St Columcille area, the village, and of course some came back to Newquay. But another cargo was grain. They used to store grain in what is now the Harbour Hotel, which was an old grain store, and when sufficient grain was stored there enough to make a cargo, it was shot down a chute down into the waiting vessel underneath down in the harbour, and it was taken away various ports. Some of the old sailors used to tell me that grain was not a very favoured cargo because it could shift. They put shifting boards in to try and keep it steady, but of course a lot of these vessels, by the time they got a bit old, they used to leak a bit as well, and that didn't help the grain because it would swell. So not a very good cargo at all. Again, a regular cargo used to be China clay. This would be brought into the harbour by trams from the other coast, from the China clay works. And again, this wasn't favoured all that well, because after they'd loaded a load of China clay, not as it is now in pellet form, this was actually just in clay form. Dry weather, a lot of dust would form onto the decks, and unless they washed them down very, very thoroughly, they were very, very slippery. But that was another of the cargoes that used to go up to the potteries. Another source was Ireland. A lot of our vessels actually traded with Ireland, which of course was only just across the Bristol Channel, and the schooners that went there, they traded in small ports, only little inlets, more or less like Porth. And a story has been told of the Irish people in the sort of 1880s. They were very, very poor. The children used to run around with bare feet, and they were quite destitute, really. And on one occasion, one of our schooners put into a little port there, and they found that the coal was disappearing from the coal scuttle, which was kept on the deck there. This was to feed a little iron stove which was in the galley for cooking purposes. And the skipper said, well, we've got to try and catch whoever's taking the coal. So they tealed a rat trap there. They kept rat traps on these vessels because they were continually overrun by rats. So the rat trap was, well, there's several rat traps there, but this particular one was tealed by the scuttle. Well, that night they all went down below to sleep, and in the middle of the night they were woke by a woman's screams. So they dashed up onto the deck, and there was one of the local ladies there, unfortunately, with her fingers in the rat trap. Not a very pleasant experience. So they had actually caught the offender, and I don't think they lost any more coal. Another little story about out in Ireland, some of the landowners used to invite the masters to go shooting with them, and very often the masters used to take their shotguns with them, not shotguns that we know today, very often muzzle loading sporting guns, and they would go shooting with the local landowner. So that meant then there was a bit of fresh rabbit or extra food for the crew.